Um, Hello and welcome to our Cabinet meeting of the 6th of September. Thank you very much for coming on such a lovely evening. For item number 1 on the agenda is apologies. We have a full attendance this evening, except with Councillors Irons, Lanning, Pritchard and Skeet, who all join us via Zoom. So we are all here for the Cabinet tonight. I should also say that a number of officers are also joining on Zoom as well. So thank you to them for coming. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Are there any of those? I can see none, so there's no declarations of interest. Item 3. The minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of July 2021. Does anybody object to those minutes, or can they be approved? There's no objection, so they're approved. So the first substantive item on the agenda, item 4, is on the Clarion Estate Regeneration Programme support. Obviously, this issue was also discussed at the Sustainable Communities overview and scrutiny panel last week, but we have only just received their report, so there hasn't been time to print that. But I'm sure Councillor Whelton, who's introducing this item, can refer to it in his comments about the report. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I formally move the report and recommendations. Rebuilding High Path, Eastfields and Ravensbury was first given the go-ahead by Cabinet back in 2014. We gave the go-ahead as we recognised that the estates needed rebuilding, as much of the housing had come to the end of its life, but also as well the number of overcrowding issues that existed. The estate regeneration will deliver 2,550 homes with commercial and community space, and is the largest regeneration scheme in the 6-year history of Merton Council. Outline Planning Permission was also granted for the whole regeneration in 2018 by the Merton Council Planning Committee. As a council, we have seen the first stages of the Ravensbury development completed, with the first stage of High Path shortly to be completed, with the second stage at High Path and the remainder of Ravensbury having been given detailed go-ahead by the Planning Committee. If approval is given tonight, this work will get underway shortly. All of us are aware of disturbing insight that many tenants in Eastfields have been living in, and the failure of Clarion to carry out basic repairs on the estate. We have been very clear as a council that this is unacceptable and that the regeneration cannot be used as an excuse not to undertake basics work, which has always been an obligation on Clarion. As Cabinet member, I am having regular meetings with Clarion to discuss repairs on Eastfields and how they are being addressed. We have also insisted as a council on much better, more regular communication between Clarion and residents, as well as the council. This starts with a safely managed discussion to understand the views of tenants. Clarion are responsible for the supply and maintenance of the borough's housing stock, and we expect them to put this right. Every resident has the right to a decent standard of living. Therefore, as part of the report, we are asking Cabinet to support an amendment to the stock transfer agreement to commit Clarion to delivering decent home standards upgrade, linked to any failure to achieve regeneration delivery milestones, to ensure that these works are guaranteed to be delivered within a specified timeframe, irrespective of the status of the Merton regeneration scheme. This report also sets out how the regeneration is to be delivered, given the financial deficit in the project which had been identified, and making it financially viable. In a £1.2 billion regenerations, finances can fluctuate, and the changes that are being proposed will allow this to proceed. As part of the financial adjustment, this report asks that the 5% sales clawback mechanism in private sales is taken out as long as it remains in a deficit position at programme level. In the event that the project finances change and again reaches or exceeds a break-even position, then it will become payable to the council. The report also seeks an amendment to the stock transfer agreement to specific partnership working arrangements between Clarion and the council to include open book business plan progress updates and monitoring and regular identification, management and mitigation of risks to viability and deliverability. This approach is proposed to ensure proactive management and monitoring of future risks. Important to all of this is also to ensure that we continue to receive 100% nominations to true voids, but that a protocol between Clarion Housing Group and the council is drawn up so as to assist Clarion in meeting its regeneration's ambition, but also discharge our statutory duties with a protocol agreed between council and Clarion Housing Group. We are also looking at options for a freehold asset to be transferred to the council that may reflect some value of the clawback suspension, and further examination is currently ongoing. Over the past year, we have robustly scrutinised, challenged through dialogue over the last 12 months by London Borough member officers, members and Merton's independent financially viability assessments consultants, SQW. This includes the identified viability deficit and a range of potential mitigation and value optimism measures and interventions. I would like to thank them for the work, as it is important that the finance of this scheme can be independently assessed. If we approve the recommendations, Clarion will commit to progressing with design development, public and stakeholder consultation, and seeking any necessary consents with full acknowledgement that it still represents their risk to deliverability and that the council's planning. We have been advised that the application of the first detailed part for Eastfields will come forward later this year if this report is approved, but also as well shortly the third stage of the high path regeneration. I welcome that Clarion has started the consultation with residents on this, and I recently attended a resident consultation on Eastfields. I would also like to take this opportunity of thanking the Sustainable Communities Panel for their work in looking at this report last Thursday. They have made recommendations, and in order to properly assess them, we ask that this is deferred to the October meeting when fuller consideration can be given to the recommendations, particularly as they relate to the ongoing oversight and performance monitoring of Clarion. In relation to the recommendations that relate to the principle of the agreement with Clarion, which is under consideration tonight, many of them do not differ in principles from the recommendation that Cabinet is being asked to progress. I would also like to take this opportunity of thanking future Merton officers and our housing needs team led by Steve Langley for the work in bringing this report to Cabinet. This is a complex report which has involved much officer time, but is crucial in terms of regeneration delivery. In view of the implications of the report, we are also asking that the council notes the report for consideration at its meeting next week, which will allow all councillors to contribute on how we can successfully deliver regeneration here in Merton. I formally move the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Whelton. The lead officer on this item is Chris Lee, the Director of Environment and Regeneration. Chris, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Nothing to add, Chair. Thank you.
Very good. Well, that was a very comprehensive report by Councillor Whelton. Chris, I'd be grateful if you could pass on our thanks as expressed by Councillor Whelton to the Future Merton team, and also to, well, actually through John Morgan, who's the Director for Community and Housing, to the Housing Needs team for their work on this project, which has been very detailed. No further speakers. Obviously, Councillor Whelton has referred to the unacceptable response to maintenance issues of Clarion, and clearly they remain a concern. But these proposals are about ensuring that we have more new affordable housing for the people who desperately need it in Merton. So can we move to a vote on the recommendations A to H? Is everybody in agreement with those, or is anybody in disagreement with those? Using the new Zoom terminology. No, so those recommendations are all approved. Thank you very much. Item 5 is the expansion of Merton Medical Education Services and the future of Lavender Nursery. And the Cabinet member responsible to lead on this is Councillor Eleanor Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, tonight there are two important items from my portfolio to be discussed that are critical to some of the most vulnerable and in-need children and young people in the borough. So firstly, this item 5, is about the future of two much-loved services, Merton Medical Education Service and the Lavender London Road Nursery. Merton Medical Education Service is a statutory service that we have to provide for the growing numbers of children who temporarily need to come out of mainstream school for medical needs. Pupils who come to MMES are referred on the basis of medical evidence from a hospital consultant or child and adolescent mental health services, often after having received inpatient care in hospital. MMES is part of the Melbury College, a local authority-run group of specialist education services. And until summer 2020, MMES was located in a building on Canterbury Road next to some other Melbury College schools. While this was never ideal, the urgent need to rehouse MMES came when there were simply too many pupils to fit into that building. As a temporary measure, MMES has been educating pupils at the council-owned former office building at Worsfold House, but this is not an appropriate site for a school, and to turn it into one would require demolishing it and rebuilding it at a cost of many millions. Meanwhile, the number of very poorly children and young people, often with severe mental health issues, such as being at risk of suicide, or physical issues such as cancer, have continued to grow. Therefore, a new home for Merton Medical Education Service is urgently needed. As the paper and previous papers presented to Cabinet outline, we undertook an extensive search for suitable properties. The only one that meets the needs of MMES and can be delivered within a necessary timescale and budget is the building at Lavender London Road. This building would need only minor adaptations to meet the needs of MMES pupils. Lavender London Road is a building which has been providing services for local families for several decades. Currently, it is a council-run nursery, offering a mix of fully funded places and places for fee-paying families. As outlined at the last Cabinet meeting, we undertook a wide-reaching consultation about the initially suggested proposal of moving the funded 2-year-old provision to nearby children's centres and ceasing to provide full-time year-round daycare services, given the growth in other early years places nearby. However, we listened carefully to the consultation responses, and while from educational professionals there was a clear message that MMES needs a new home and that this site was ideal, it was clear that some nursery parents felt that the removal of the service would leave a gap in the local childcare market. Therefore, we developed a new proposal to continue to provide the funded 2-year-old places nearby, as we had always done in the original proposal, but also to keep a proportion of the daycare places full-time year-round, but delivering the service from another site. After discussing this with parents and staff, we are now in a position to formally recommend shifting the service to Lavender Steers Meads Children's Centre, which was initially built as a nursery. This site best meets the priorities that the parents told us most important to them, such as good quality childcare with free-flowing access to outdoor space and in the local area. All current children and those currently on the waiting list at Lavender London Road would be offered a place, and the site can meet their needs. We would then work towards prioritising daycare places where we all agree there is a gap in the market. That is, for affordable, high-quality care for 2- and 3-year-old children from low-income families. This aligns with our political priorities as a Labour Council to focus our limited resources on the families who are most in need. I would like to thank officers for all of their work, and a big thank you to the parents and staff who have responded so thoughtfully and comprehensively to the previous consultation and been involved in the discussions on the updated proposal. I would like us to approve these recommendations so that we can be educating our most unwell children in a setting that meets their needs as soon as possible. I formally move the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stringer. And the officer, lead officer on this item is Jane McSherry, the Director of Children's Schools and Families. Jane, is there anything that you'd like to add before we take questions?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions, I wanted to ask about this as well. Obviously, I'm a ward councillor in Lavender Fields and have been for nearly 20 years, and it's a fantastic community and a fantastic area. I'm very pleased that the number of and the quality of education services in my ward is going to be increased. Particularly the Whelton Medical Education Service is an amazing facility, and I hope, Jane, through you and Councillor Stringer, you can pass on my gratitude to the staff there and at Melbury for the wonderful service that they provide in difficult circumstances where they currently are. But there are, it's fair to say, a number of local users in particular who've been concerned about reports of the closure. And we have also received a couple of items of correspondence in advance of this meeting. So I'd just like to deal with the issues raised in those and just ask about them. So Tara Townley, who's a resident of a different ward, and Siobhan McDonough, who's obviously the MP for Mitcham Morden, have both contacted us. And I think to summarise what they're asking for reassurance on three things. So the first of those is there's a question mark as to whether there is actually a covenant that's preventing us from taking this decision. So I'd be grateful if officers can help us with that. Then there is a question as to whether the Lavender Nursery, as opposed to MMES, but whether the Lavender Nursery is actually a children's centre, and therefore the decision needs to be made in a different way. And then thirdly, they're asking for reassurance, does this mean that there will be the closure of an affordable nursery service for our residents? So I wondered whether maybe, is it appropriate, Louise Round as the monitoring officer, whether you're able to tackle the one on the covenant, and then maybe Jane should answer the other questions? Is that okay? Do you want to do with that first?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, there are two issues in relation to the land that the current nursery cited on. The first is, as you've indicated, a restrictive covenant requiring it to be used only for recreational purposes. Clearly, that hasn't been complied with even in the current user, but it's a relatively straightforward matter to get that covenant discharged at the land registry and to take out indemnity insurance to cover any risk which is already there that someone might seek to challenge that. And the second issue is in relation to the capacity in which the council holds the land, and it holds it as trustee for the charity. And it's obviously really important that the council, when it's acting as a trustee, ensures that the user of any land in its custodianship is in accordance with the purposes for which the charity was established. We're reasonably confident that the MMES does fall within that charitable purpose, but I'm advising the Chief Executive that with her trustee hat on, she should apply to the Charity Commission just to be absolutely clear that the purposes are broad enough to cover the MME use. But I would like to also make it clear that that application would have to be made and ought to be made whatever the use of the land. The existing use, if anything, is slightly more problematic in terms of the user than the proposed new user. So it's relatively straightforward, but it's a decision that needs to be taken, and not by the council exercising its education functions, but by the council wearing its trustee hat. Hence the recommendation that the Chief Executive make that application to the Charity Commission. It doesn't stop you making the decision tonight.
Okay, thank you. That clears that up. And obviously, the Whelton Medical Education Service provides a very important service to some of the most sick, disabled and disadvantaged children who, deserve to get a good education, even with their conditions. So that's that issue dealt with. Thank you for that, Louise. Jane, is it appropriate for you to answer the questions on whether the site is actually a children's centre and whether it's going to mean the closure of an affordable nursery service?
Thank you, Chair. So we use the Children's Centre consultation guidance because that should explain how the local authority will continue to meet the needs of families with children under 5 as part of any reorganisation of services. So the 2013 Sure Start Children's Centre statutory guidance says that if a local authority shouldn't close an existing children's centre site in any reorganisation of provision unless they can demonstrate that where they decide to close a children's centre site, the outcomes for children, particularly the most disadvantaged, would not be adversely affected. So in this context, this is the 2-year-old funded places, as they are for our most disadvantaged children and families. And at no point in the consultation process has there been any proposed reduction in the number of places provided in the local area for those children. It also goes on to say that it shouldn't compromise the duty to have sufficient children's centres to meet local need. I mean, it's also worth noting that in the same statutory guidance, it states that children's centres are as much about making appropriate and integrated services available as it is about providing premises in particular geographical areas. So a Sure Start Children's Centre is defined in the Act as a place or a group of places. So for a number of years, the council has provided a hub and spoke model of children's centres, with the hub in this locality being Lavender Steersmead, and Lavender London Road has been purely a nursery and therefore a spoke and not a hub children's centre with a broad range of children's centres provision. So the council's approach for some time has been to move away from council-run children's centre services being defined as being delivered from a children's centre building, and a move towards a more responsive service tailored to need, delivered in a variety of ways. And so in the original Cabinet report, as Councillor Stringer outlined, the advice of officers was that there was enough fee-paying early years childcare, early education places to meet demand, but it was recognised that there were substantial objections to the consultation proposal, and so therefore an adjustment was made to reflect the responses, and so that's the proposal now, to re-provide Lavender nursery daycare in alternative local building, and therefore that will ensure there is sufficient children's centre provision within the local area to meet local need. And that kind of picks up on the second query also. So again, as Councillor Stringer has outlined, we'll continue to provide 24 places of full daycare provision, which will remain affordable and will be targeted at the families most in need.
Thank you, Jane. That's a very thorough response. Is there anything further that anybody would like to add? I think that that very clearly shows that all of the children who are currently there and all who are on the waiting lists should be able to continue to receive the same affordable service, and that demonstrates that we've responded to the consultation. I should also, before we move on to the recommendations, ask Jane if you could please thank the amazing staff at the Lavender Nursery. It's great that it's going to be retained as a service after the original consultation, and I think the popularity of that service is a testament to the great work of the staff there. So if you can pass that on. And likewise as well, throughout this whole process, we've been incredibly impressed by the commitment, dedication, and brilliance really of the teachers and head teacher at the Merton Medical Education Service. So please pass on our thanks for that. If there are no further points or questions, can we move to the recommendations, A and B? Is there any disagreement to those recommendations? I can see none, so they're agreed. Thank you very much. So item 6 is the expansion of Melrose School into Whatley Avenue, and the lead member on this again is Councillor Eleanor Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, item 6 is about the education of another but very different group of vulnerable young learners. So while MMES that we've just been talking about provides education that is intended to be temporary, we have a growing number of young people with complex special educational needs, which mean that they cannot attend mainstream schools at all. The growth in the number of these young children with these needs, alongside changes to legislation which put more responsibility on the local authorities to find education that meets their needs and their preferences, has led to a rising number of people sent to independent schools, often out of borough. This is not what parents want, it's not what we want. We want to be able to provide the high quality places closer to people's homes here in Merton. We want this provision to be flexible enough to cater for a range of needs, including allowing pupils to study for full GCSEs, just like they would have done if they'd been in a mainstream school, where that's appropriate for the learner. Furthermore, sending children to independent schools comes with a hefty price tag for us as a council on an already overstretched and under-resourced budget for high needs education. Therefore, we've been working really hard over the past few years to increase our special needs provision in state-run schools. This paper is about new provision to meet growing need for education for children with autism spectrum disorder in particular. As with the MMES situation, we worked hard to find the right location and the right provider. I'm excited about the plans that the officers and head teachers have pulled together, where Melrose School will establish a new site at Whatley Avenue. This site has a long history as an educational site in Merton, most recently as the temporary site of Harris Academy, Wimbledon, but it is now vacant. Having undertaken the statutory consultation, and most importantly, having engaged with the parents of children with special educational needs, I'm glad to say that there is near unanimous support for this use of the site from local schools, residents, parents, and from across all parties. I'd like to thank everybody for their support and officers for their hard work, and in particular for the school staff and governors for their work on this. And I ask for your support for these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stringer. And again, the lead officer on this item is Jane McSherry, who's the Director of Children's Schools and Families. Jane, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Nothing further to add, Chair.
Fantastic. Questions? I think I saw that the Councillor Akyigyina wanted to ask a question on this.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ellie. Could you tell me the capacity of the site and how many children can actually get in there? We will be able to have.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so as the paper says, we're looking at this housing at least 80 children, which might not sound like much for somewhere that's recently had parts of a secondary school, but given the needs of these pupils and the need for them to be in small classes, even fitting this many on the site is actually going to be, it's still going to be tight. I was on the site just recently with the head teacher, who'd just been seeing the project manager and thinking through how we're going to make it all work. So I have seen some reports that this site at Whatley could have housed both this special school and also the special school expansion and MMES. And that just simply isn't the case given the site footprint in the buildings. But by fitting in at least around 80 children, given the difference in cost between a special school provided by the local authority versus an independent one, this would be a difference of about £1.6 million a year that we'll be saving.
Thank you. That sounds like a business-like approach as well as one that's really good for the education of our children. So thank you for that. There are no further questions. I should just apologise though. At the outset of the meeting, I should have drawn attention to the new member of Cabinet who's attending her first meeting tonight, and thanked and welcomed Councillor Brenda Fraser for agreeing to join the Cabinet. I know that the topic that we talked about just now is has long been a top concern of hers, and you know, she's just recently been the chair of the Children and Young People's panel, and I know that many councillors are extremely concerned to ensure that you know, our children with special needs and autism get the education that they deserve. So just whilst moving on, again, just we can thank a minute our thanks to the staff and governors of Melrose for the work that they've done, and it's great that this important education service is being expanded in the borough, and is going to be serving some of our most deserving children. And it's going to be a challenge to find space for these 80 children, but it's fantastic that we're doing so. So moving to the recommendations, A and B, did anybody dissent from those recommendations? Looking behind me to the screens, no. So those recommendations are agreed. Thank you for that. Item 7 on the agenda is the extension of the concession contract for the provision of bus shelters, freestanding units and associated 6-seat sheet advertising within Merton, and the lead member on this is Councillor Martin Whelton.
Thank you, Chair. This report recommends that Cabinet approves a 2-year extension to the Council's current 15-year contract with JC&Co for bus shelter and on-street advertising in order to mitigate the Council's financial losses arising from COVID-19. It also recommends that Cabinet correct an error in the original November 2019 decision report, which was cited as being 10 years with a potential for a 5-year extension, whereas the intention of the Council and all the procurement, assessment and the terms of the signed contract is for 15 years with a potential for a 5-year extension. It is my view that this report is an important report. I think we do have to recognise the detriment that on-street advertising had during the COVID-19 lockdowns when many of our town centres and high streets were closed, but also as well businesses not wanting to pay for advertising during that period. Therefore, under the terms of the contract and the Council and JC&Co, they agreed a rental reduction from April to July 2020 due to the impact of COVID. Obviously, as part of recovery, things now are thankfully starting to return to normal. But we believe that this report is an important report in terms of the revenue it will bring back into the Council over the contract period. So I ask Cabinet to approve this report tonight. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Councillor Whelton. The lead officer on this again is Chris Lee, the Director for Education, for Environment and Regeneration. Chris, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Nothing to add, Chair. Thank you.
Very good. I can see no questions. Can you please, Chris, pass on our thanks? Well, first of all, thank you to you for being the lead member on this, but also to Sue Key, who's the Principal Programme and Resources Officer who's been responsible for this, and to all of those who've worked on this report. Can the recommendations be agreed, or does anybody disagree with the recommendations? Okay, those are all agreed. Thank you. Then item 8 tonight is the financial report 2021 to 22, period 3. That covers June, the period up to June 2021. And the lead member on this is Councillor Tobin Byers.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I start by thanking Caroline Holland and Roger Kershaw and everyone in their teams for all the work that goes into these reports. These come to Cabinet every month and ensure that we monitor our income and expenditure against the budget. And clearly it's ever more important, particularly at the current stage of the impact of the pandemic. I also want to thank officers across the Council for all the work that goes into keeping us on track with the budget. And I think the report really shows how difficult this continues to be in light of the pandemic. We've said all along that the pandemic impact was likely to stretch well into this financial year and wasn't going to be just in the previous financial year, and that ultimately government support needed to continue throughout this year. And the table on page 44 shows the degree to which COVID continues to impact the budget, particularly with lost income. At this stage, we are only anticipating one further tranche of the government's sales fees and charges monies of just over £2 million. But as the report shows, the pandemic does continue to impact services right across the Council, and these are likely to continue to be impacted throughout the remainder of this year, even as the government funding ceases. This all makes forecasting very challenging, particularly because a lot of the income assumptions will be dependent on resident behaviour, and it's very difficult to know at what stage some of those income streams may come back and to what extent they do. And added to that, we've got the uncertainty of not knowing exactly what's going to happen as we enter the autumn period and cases inevitably start to go up again. We saw the financial position fluctuate month to month last year, and I think it's fair to say this year is proving to be equally challenging. In addition to the lost income, we are now starting to see some of the demand that was suppressed during the pandemic return, and this is most reflected in this report in children's schools and families, where period 3 has seen a return to more normal levels of activity. including a spike in high cost placements, some of which have been perhaps artificially depressed over the past year or so. In addition to COVID, the other significant cost pressure remains the DSG, and the report shows that the cumulative deficit is now estimated to be 37.3 million by the end of this financial year. Clearly, the item that Cabinet agreed earlier will play an important role in helping to tackle some of that cost, but the scale of the issue goes considerably beyond that. We are therefore, unfortunately at this stage, forecasting a net adverse variance of 4.7 million on service expenditure, which increases to 7.4 million when corporate and funding items are included. And overall, I think the report demonstrates just how difficult the position remains across the council in terms of both the additional expenditure and the reduced income. So I'd just like to thank again Caroline Holland and Roger Kershaw for all their work they do in helping us to navigate through this, and again to thank officers across the council for doing everything in their power to control the spend in such difficult circumstances. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Byers. And the lead officer on this item, as Councillor Byers has referred to, is Caroline Holland, the Director of Corporate Services. Caroline, was there anything that you would like to add to illuminate us on the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just like to add that we've had some guidance on the income compensation scheme, which says that we should be able to submit our claims later this month, but we won't get confirmation of the amounts we would have received until December. We are still working with London councils to submit some lobbying agendas for the spending review around the impact of COVID continuing. We are also now beginning to see an increase in adult social care referrals and the impact of some of the discharge assessments from hospitals directly into care homes as well. So I think there are some significant additional pressures to come without, at the moment, some funding to go alongside that. So it's going to remain a challenging period for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. I don't think there's any other points that that we wanted to raise. Yeah, first of all, thank you to Caroline and to Roger. And if you can pass on our thanks through you to the other officers and other staff who've worked very hard to ensure that we have these financial reports, which are very useful. Particularly, we need to note the impact of the pandemic, as Councillor Byers has said, and how challenging it is to forecast finances at the moment, especially with respect to the COVID pandemic. Obviously, it's a very difficult position for us, and there's a forecast deficit by the end of the year as things currently stand. But can we all agree the report and the recommendations A to C? Any dissenters? Okay, those recommendations are approved. Thank you very much. The other items on the agenda are all exempt items that we didn't need to refer to because we were able to deal with things without referring to them. So actually, that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much to everybody, both on Zoom and in person, who've taken